Ladies, thank you so much. Back when I was in elementary school, I was probably in the third grade, as I recall, and the teacher explained to us how in the next day or two there was going to be a solar eclipse. And that doesn't happen very often. In case you forgot how that works, it's when the moon comes in between the sun and the earth, and all you see is the outline of the sun. And we are essentially then in the shadow of the moon until, as we're continuing to spin, we come out of the moon shadow. Anyway, the teacher explained that this was a not altogether frequent occurrence, and so we were going to be able to observe this, but it was very important to not look up at the sun while this happens, because the UV rays and the brightness of the sun, even though obscured, can do real damage to your eyes. You could even wind up going blind, so we're not going to look at this. Instead, what we did was to prepare or create these little devices, and it was involving paper and popsicle sticks, as I recall, and somehow we were to hold these down, and if we're outside, we would be able to see what's going on up above by looking at this paper and doing so safely without damaging our eyes. And so we did that. The next day it comes time for this solar eclipse to occur, and the teacher is going to take us outside. And so we all gather our little contraptions, and repeatedly as we're getting ready to go out, she reminds us and tells us, whatever you do, don't look up. Don't look at the sun. Don't watch this. You just look down. Do not look at this. You'll go blind. And so anyway, she's told us all of this. We get outside, and at first everything seems to be fine. But as the moments begin to pass, it's starting to get darker and darker and darker. Here it is, it's the middle of the day, there's not a cloud in the sky, and it's getting as dark as dusk as the moon is moving in front of the sun, and we are finding ourselves on the earth in the moon shadow. And so I'm looking down at my contraption, and it's just not doing very well. And I know the teacher has said repeatedly, whatever you do, don't look up, don't look up, don't look up. But I just had to. And I just had to see it. And thankfully, it was very brief. I looked up, I caught a glimpse, and then I hurried back and made sure I looked back down so that I wouldn't get in trouble with a teacher, and so that I wouldn't be having to, finish my homework in Braille and all of this stuff. And so, but anyway, the teacher was explicit in repeating over and over and over again, whatever you do, don't look up, don't look up. And the more that she said that made me, and I'm sure more than myself, just itch and burn to be able to look up and see what was going on. As she gave us and repeated that command to us and for us, though, it was not, because she was trying to keep something monumental or significant from us, was she? She wasn't trying to keep this from us. Rather, she's trying to keep something good for us, namely our eyesight. So that's why she said, do not do this. I'm not trying to keep something from you. I'm trying to keep something wonderful for you. Now, that was true not only with the command that she gave us as her students, but it's also true with the nature of God's commands. As God has and continues to command us to do things and not to do things, it is absolutely not because He's trying to keep good or pleasant things from us. Rather, it is that He's trying to keep the best for us. That's why He's given us the commands in Scripture. That's why, in a particular note for us, over these past numbers of weeks, we've been looking at the 10 Commandments. God has given these not to keep good things from us, but to keep the best things for us. He's giving these commandments for our good. That's true of all the commandments. It's true of the 8th commandment as we come to it today, where God said very simply, you shall not steal. But the question is, what's God trying to keep from, what is it that He's trying to keep for us? What good is He trying to keep for us by saying, do not do this, to not steal, don't take that which does not belong to you? Well, to answer that question, it goes back to an even more broad question. Why is it that God doesn't want us to steal? And when we can answer that, we can see what He's trying to reserve for us. We see the answer to all of this in Ephesians chapter 4. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today to just one verse of Scripture, verse 28 of Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28. Paul says very simply, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Here in this passage, God is answering all this for us, and He's showing us, quite frankly, what God is trying to reserve for us, but also explaining to us why it is that God doesn't want us to take that which does not belong to us. And He gives us, through Paul here, 3 simple reasons why we should not steal. And the first is this: stealing diminishes the value of work. Stealing diminishes the value of work. Well, we're working our way through the 10 Commandments. We come to the 8th commandment, and back in Exodus 20, we read the 8th commandment very succinctly: you shall not steal. Here in this passage, Paul is further fleshing out this commandment and shedding more light on what God's expectations are for us. But before we deal with what Paul says here in Ephesians, we need to think just in brass tacks for a little bit about the commandment itself. You shall not steal. What is stealing? Well, you know that stealing is taking that which does not belong to you. Something that someone else has, you're taking it as it belongs to you, though it does not. You're taking it. You're not buying it, you're just taking it. God forbids this. Now, obviously, something like going to the store this afternoon, going to Walmart and grabbing a pack of batteries and sticking them in your pocket and walking out the door, that's clearly stealing. And it's very easy for us to look at this commandment and say, well, that's what God is forbidding, that type of behavior, shoplifting, basic theft, that's what He's dealing with. But we very easily, because of that, say, well, this doesn't have any application for me. I'm not a thief, I don't steal. Well, we need to think more specifically about the fact that stealing is taking anything, possession of anything that does not belong to you. So what are some ways other than shoplifting that we can actually be stealing? Well, for those that are students or those that are preparing reports that are going to be submitted, one of the things that you can do is you are, for example, writing a paper or a thesis of some sort. You can take words, sentences, paragraphs that you have found in some other book. You can put them in your paper, into the document with your name on it, and present those ideas and present those words as though they are yours without documenting that. Listen, if you are doing that, if you're copying someone else's work and presenting it as yourself, in the academic world, that's referred to as plagiarism. More basically, it's stealing. It's taking someone else's words or their ideas and presenting them as your own. They're not. That's stealing. But there are other ways that we can violate this command as well. Those of you who are not retired or those in the adult range that have jobs, you have a job and you are working, and when you are working, you were hired by your employer not simply for your stellar good looks and winsome personality. Beyond that, you are not simply hired because of your skills and expertise that you're bringing to the table. You're also hired and you're also compensated by your employer for your time. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way, but the truth is when you are working, if you work 8-hour days, 5 days a week, what you are doing is selling to your employer 8 hours of your life every day. When you accept a salary, you're saying, okay, this is the agreed upon price that you will pay for 8 hours of my time every day. But too many times, and this doesn't necessarily happen intentionally, it happens subtly, but what can happen is that we sell this time to our employers, but then too many times we take it back because we're just goofing off. We're spending half the day in personal conversations with coworkers or chatting online or making insane numbers of personal phone calls. And though they're paying us for 8 hours a day, they're only getting an hour or two of actual work from us. Listen, that is stealing because your employer is buying your time, and you need to be a faithful steward of that and recognize that they're going to buy your time. They ought to get your time. And I understand that, and I'm not trying to be too nitpicky and say, well, you can't make any personal phone calls or you can't ever check a personal email. I'm not suggesting that. But rather, what you need to keep in mind and understand is you're selling your time to your employer. If they're paying for it, you'd better give it to them. When you take it back, you're taking what does not belong to you. You are stealing. Beyond that, there in the workplace, perhaps at your desk, there's a whole stack of office supplies. It could be paper, it could be pens, it could be pencils, Post-it notes. And I know this happens very easily. You can say, man, we're out of Post-it notes on the refrigerator. That's what I keep my shopping list on. Or if somebody calls and writes a message. And so it's very easy just to lift that little pack of Post-it notes and say, well, they've got gazillions of them in the supply room, and so this one little pack nobody's going to miss, and take that home. Listen, did you pay for that? No, you did not. Your employer did. What did they buy those supplies for? So that you could use them. Where? At work. Well, if you're not using it at work and you're taking it, you are stealing. Quit doing that. It doesn't belong to you. But there's still other ways that we can steal. And I recognize in this age of technology, this has become very easy to do today, and that is the copying of CDs and DVDs. It's very easy to do this, and you don't have to have much technical or computer skills to be able to do this. And so somebody will have gone to the store, they will have bought a CD, and you say, hey, let me get a copy of that and burn it so that you can have it. Well, so one person is paid, now two people have a copy of this. Well, how did you get this? We can say, well, I copied it. Well, in truth, what you did was to steal it. Now, I hope you recognize that people that are recording CDs and music labels and music companies, they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. This is a business for them. That's how people make their living. And when you are defrauding them or you are taking from them that which rightfully belongs to them, what is that? Well, it's stealing. Well, today is April the 14th. That means that tomorrow is tax day, April the 15th. And if you haven't done so already, you're going to spend some time on the next period of 36 hours trying to get that return done, unless you're going to file an extension. And very easily, and with entirely too regular of an occurrence, what people do is, and we describe as cheat on their taxes. They'll list deductions that really aren't or not commensurate with what the actual deductions are, and we'll say that we're cheating or we're fudging a little bit on our taxes. Well, when push comes to shove, when you're cheating on your taxes, obviously you're lying. You're saying this is true, you're signing off on that when that's not true. But beyond that, because of your deception, you are keeping money that rightfully belongs to the government. And listen, I get it. I don't want to give the government one more cent than I have to, but I recognize there's some money that I've got to give them that they are owed, that they are entitled to. And so if I withhold that unjustly, what am I doing? I'm stealing. Well, there's other ways that we can do this. And what I'm getting ready to describe is what I would refer to theologically as meddling. You ready? You go to McDonald's, you go to Chick-fil-A, you go to Wendy's. Out at these display cases, they've got napkins. They've got stacks of straws and spoons and forks and salt and pepper packets. Beyond that, they've got Sweet and Low and Splenda and Equal. Now, if I were to conduct a search of ladies' purses today, if I were to have you dump all of those, empty all those purses out, I'm inclined to think that I would find more than a few of these items that came from a McDonald's or a Burger King or from some other restaurant. Listen to me, you are aware of the fact that these are put out by these various restaurants so that you might use them. If you want your tea to be sweeter, here's some Sweet and Low. You can use that. You need to wipe your face because it's dirty, here's some napkins. You want a straw, here's a straw. The restaurants put these out, and they are put out for this singular purpose so that you may use them while you're there. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting that if you take more napkins than you, or if you get a stack of napkins out anticipating to use them and you don't, that you have to try to go push them back in the dispenser. I'm not suggesting that because nobody wants your dirty fingers all over their napkins. And so I'm not suggesting that. And don't throw them away. That's just being wasteful. At that point, take them and put some in your glove box. That's okay. The question is the motive behind it. Are you getting this stack so that you can stuff your glove box? Are you getting these extra packs of ketchup so that you can put in that everything drawer that you have in the kitchen in case you run out of ketchup? If that's the purpose, what are you doing? You're taking something that does not rightfully belong to you, something that somebody else has spent good money on to provide for you in that particular instance, but you're taking it now for your personal benefit. Listen, that is nothing but stealing. And about all of this, as Paul fleshes out the command in verse 28 of Ephesians 4, he says very simply, let him who stole steal no longer. To replace that, instead of taking that which belongs to someone else, Paul says to replace that with something. Rather, let him labor, working with his hands what is good. Let's be very plain about this, that work in working is a God-given ability and a God-given responsibility. I hope you are aware of the fact that work existed prior to the fall. Adam and Eve worked in the garden before sin ever entered the world. Now, work became more difficult because of sin, but they nevertheless worked before sin came into the world. Why? Because God has wired us and has put us in this earth, on this earth, with the expectation that if you're able-bodied, you ought to work. You ought to work so that you can provide for yourself and for your family, so that you might be able to provide the necessities of life. And In short, the expectation again of God is that if you are able-bodied, you ought to be working. God takes no delight in. In fact, I believe God is angered by, and his wrath is stirred up by sloth and laziness. God takes delight in and is pleased in people doing a hard day's work. God expects you to do this so that you might be able to provide for yourself and provide for your family. In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 5, Paul says, the one who does not work and provide for his own, Paul says, especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Paul says somebody that is able to do so and is too lazy to work and provide for their family, they are worse than the most godless pagan, especially if this is an individual that professes to follow Christ. Why? Because God has wired us and has given us this expectation. If you're able-bodied and you're capable of doing so, you ought to be busying yourself with work so that you can provide for yourself a living, provide for the needs of your family. But when you or I or anyone steals, whether it is very directly like taking something from a store through shoplifting, or it's more subtle by the office supplies that we take or the CDs that we burn copies of, what we are doing is to seek and we are pursuing providing for ourselves at the expense of someone else. Now, what's the expectation? God expects you to work to provide for yourself and for your family, not to take from somebody else so that you can provide. God expects us and has commanded us and set forth very clearly that we are to work. And when we take from others that which belongs to them, whether it's their words, their ideas, their work, it's the fruit of their imaginations or their labors, their possessions, what we are doing is diminishing the value of work. We're saying it's just not that important. When I was little, I used to love, especially this time of year on Saturday mornings, I would get up early and I would get on my bike and I would start riding through the neighborhood to go to yard sales. And I never had more than a few dollars or anything, but I just loved to look at other people's junk. And invariably, I would come back with some of their junk on my bike. But I remember one yard sale that I went to. A friend of mine, we were in the same grade in school. His name was Eric. His family was having a yard sale. And so I stopped by Eric's house. They had all this stuff out there. And I remember he had some toys that he was getting rid of. But in addition, he had some magazines, some comic books that he was selling. And there was one of them that caught my eye. It was a Cracked magazine. I don't know if you're familiar with Cracked. It's kind of like Mad magazine. But this particular magazine, it was in a clear plastic wrapper. In a clear plastic bag. And Eric pointed out to me that this was the first edition. It said Volume 1, Issue 1 on it. He said, this is the first edition. And it was only a few dollars that he was wanting for this. And I thought, man, this is going to be my ticket for the future. This is some priceless heirloom. I need to buy this thing. This is a real collector's edition. And so I paid him whatever it was for it, and I took it home. And as I get it home, I'm just relishing in the great value that this unique, one-of-a-kind, limited edition copy of this magazine is worth. But as I'm looking at it, I notice that Eric has done something to this magazine. On the cover, in a black ballpoint pen, he has circled the words, Volume 1, Issue 1. Well, I don't know what that thing is worth now. I'm sure it's worth something. But whatever it's worth less because of what he did to it. He diminished by writing on it the value of this magazine. In much the same way, in any fashion that you and I steal or take that which does not rightfully belong to us, we are diminishing what God has made and declared to be special and unique and valuable in the form of work. When we take what doesn't belong to us, we diminish the value of work. But beyond that, Paul makes clear also that stealing challenges the principle of personal property. Stealing challenges the principle of personal property. So we have the command in Exodus 20. We see, in essence, it repeated here in Ephesians 4. The expectation, the command of God is that we are not to steal. Do not take that which belongs to someone else. Instead, he says how you should provide for yourself is through work. Now, as the command was given in Exodus, as it is fleshed out in both Old and New Testaments, that commandment operates on an implied principle. That principle is this: personal property exists. There are things that belong to me that do not belong to you. There are things that belong to you that don't belong to me. There are things that belong to God that do not belong to me. Implied within this commandment is the principle of personal property. Now think with me about that. If there was no such thing as personal property, if everything was just communal and shared, could you really steal from anybody? No, you really couldn't. Why? Because nothing would really belong to anyone else. But it's clear, and God understands, and God operates under the principle, or with the principle of personal property. In fact, I believe this is one of the ways that we are created in the image of God. Throughout the pages of Scripture, God makes clear that there are things that belong to Him. For example, with the nation of Israel, as He set forth the expectation of the tithe, God said, there's a tenth of your income that belongs to me. I know you have worked for it, you have earned it, you have labored for it, you have brought this harvest in, but there's a tenth of that is mine, that belongs to me. Now the remainder, the 90%, you use as a good steward, but that tenth, that is mine, that belongs to me. God recognizes there are things that belong to Him. And I believe likewise, God operates also under the principle there are things that become our property. They become and are entrusted into our possession. Though it is but for a season of time, during that time, it is our property. And when we take what does not belong to us, when we steal in any form or fashion, what we are doing is challenging that principle. Repeatedly, God gave His people instructions for personal property. From Exodus 22 to Leviticus 6, Leviticus 19, and Deuteronomy 24, God describes the right that people have to have personal possessions and what to do when someone takes this. And when we steal, we are saying that the God-given ability to personally possess things, to have things that we can say, okay, that's mine or that's yours. Well, we're saying, well, that principle it's of no effect. It's inconsequential. I don't need to pay attention to that. It violates the personal God-given rights of others. Stealing threatens the stability of society and ultimately undermines the decision that God made to entrust things into our personal care and personal possession. Nathan, our oldest, is in first grade, and we're going to be homeschooling starting in August, but he's finishing the school year out. And so on school days, Caroline is at home with just 3 kids. And so when Nathan gets home about 2:20, she's got all 4. And throughout the day, she's busy with a whole lot of stuff, a whole lot of repetition for one thing. And to do this, do this, do this, do this, constantly repeating. She's constantly having to referee. I don't know why it is that somehow encoded into the DNA of boys is the desire to fight, slap, poke, he's touching me, all this kind of mess. So she's constantly refereeing. In addition, we always have laundry to do, load after load after load of laundry. And so there's laundry, there's picking up, there's dealing with the dog, there is refereeing the disagreements, there's preparing meals, there's all this stuff. And so when I get home late in the afternoon and we sit down for supper, at this point she has listened to little people talk to her all day long, and they constantly need something. There's something she has been constantly doing. And so I am aware of that and aware of the stress that can cause and just her desire to have a moment's respite, just to be able to be quiet for a little bit. And so regularly what I'll do is I'll get the kids and I'll take them, especially when the weather's nice, to go to the park. We'll go somewhere, even if it's just an hour, just to give her a little bit of peace and quiet, then get them home, get them in the bed, and get ready for another day. And so, like I said, when the weather's nice, we'll go do something outside, whether at our house or at a park somewhere. But especially in the winter and especially when it's raining outside, that's not a possibility. And so on countless occasions, what I have done is to take them to Target. I think I've described this before. I'll take them to Target because Target's got a great toy section. That's a great occupier of the kids' minds. And so I'll take them and we'll start walking up and down the different aisles of the toy section at Target. The kids, they'll be picking up stuff, and those that can talk, they press that button, or they mess with this, mess with that. They'll say, Daddy, can we have this? Can we have that? And I'll say no, and they move on to something else. And we'll cover all the aisles in the toy section. And once we've done this, I'll explain that it's time to go, and invariably one of them will be holding something, clamoring for something, wanting something, and I'll say this: you need to put that down because that does not belong to us. You need to put this down because that does not belong to us. That does not belong to you. And without fail, what they'll do is to go and put it back down. Why? Because even at this young age, they understand and are operating under this principle of personal property. There are things that are mine that are not my brother's or do not belong to my sister, or there are things that are daddy's that belong to him and do not belong to me. There are things that belong to Target that do not belong to me. Even at this young age, they get this. Why? Because I believe God has written this understanding on our hearts. It's part of the way that He's wired us. In fact, it's part of the ways that we are like Him, that we are fearfully, wonderfully made in His image, that we understand there are things that belong to me that do not belong to others. And when we steal in any form or any fashion, what we are doing is challenging that principle and saying, oh, I'm just not going to pay attention to that. Yeah, that may belong to you, but I'm going to take it and make it mine. About all of this, Paul says, let him who stole steal no longer. Why? Because it challenges the principle of personal property. But there's a final challenge that Paul describes here, and that is this. Stealing squelches your ability to help others. Stealing squelches your ability to help others. In verse 28, Paul says very clearly, let him who stole steal no longer. Then he says, rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who is in need. So he says, quit stealing, start working, provide for yourselves, and beyond that, he describes this other benefit, so that you might be able to help him who has need. Well, there's a couple of things that are noteworthy about what Paul says here. First of all, Paul is communicating three different ways that we can get possessions. We can work for them, we can be given them, we can receive them. And the third way is to steal. We can work for it, we can be given it, or we can steal it, we can take it. Now, of those three, one of them is forbidden. If you didn't work for it, if it wasn't given to you, you do not take it. The other thing that's noteworthy about this, though, is that Paul is saying, you should not steal because this is wrong. God has forbidden this. This is off limits. This is bad behavior. But there's another reason that he gives there in verse 28, and that is so that we may have something to give him who has need. That we might be able to give something to him who has need. Repeatedly, God underscores the importance of work, how He's delighted in it, how He's honored by it. God expects us to work so that we can provide for ourselves and for our families. But God, especially in the pages of the New Testament, underscores the fact that we as believers and followers of Christ, we are not islands unto ourselves. That we're on the same team. And we're not just simply part of our biological family, we're part of a spiritual family. And as that is true, that we need to be mindful not simply of the needs of our biological family, but also our spiritual family. In Romans 12, where Paul is describing how we are to love each other, he says, quote, that we are to distribute to the needs of the saints. In 2 Corinthians 9, where God describes the cheerful giver, he says that the act of giving supplies the needs of the saints. Again, God has given to everybody, every able-bodied person, this expectation that they are to work. They are to busy themselves, and through that, take care of and supply their needs for they and their family. But God also is aware of the fact that there are circumstances that people get into, especially within the family of God, oftentimes circumstances that are not of their own making or of their own choosing. Sometimes it's because of the loss of a job or an unexpected illness, and there's a lack of insurance coverage and just massive medical bills. And so when these needs occur, what I believe God expects of us as part of His family, we're all on the same team, that we're not just focusing about our biological family, but our spiritual family. And just as it's true within the home, so too as part of our spiritual family, we should do everything within our power to ensure that those needs are met. We do not do so because this person is incapable of work or refuses to work, rather because they're doing the best that they can and they just are experiencing some needs. And when we do that, what happens is that at some point in the future, it may be you who's experiencing that need. And when we're constantly operating under this principle, it means that especially within the family of God, needs that exist become needs that are met. But if someone steals from us, if someone takes that which does not belong to them, what happens is that we've got less resources to be able to supply or to meet those needs with. Let me give you an example. One of the responsibilities that I have as a pastor is to deal with requests for assistance. And those within the church are much easier to deal with than those in the community at large. And especially at the church that I pastored in Charlotte, the economic constraints or the needs in the community were significant. And so I would say probably 200 requests a year we would get in our church of people in the community trying to get help with this, that, or the other. Well, one particular Sunday, we had a guy that showed up, and he was visiting. I met him as he was coming in, and he was looking for a Sunday school class, and I showed him where to go. After Sunday school, he came to the worship service, and after the service was over, he wanted to talk to me for a few moments, and he began to describe how he was needing some help and wanted to know if there was anything that we had at the church that he could do to earn some extra money. He said recently he had lost a good-paying job, and he had lost his home, and he had very little at this point. He had taken a job doing construction, and he's just trying to get by, and wanted to know if he could do something around the church to earn some extra money. Well, I thought that was a praiseworthy goal, and I said, well, how about coming back tomorrow and I'll see what I can find. And so I started asking some questions or looking around the church, and we really didn't have anything in terms of a job that we could give him to do. We had, cleaning service that cleaned the building, and our House and Grounds Committee had taken care of needs within the facilities themselves. And so he got there, and I told him, I said, I'm just sorry, we really don't have anything that you can do. And he explained that what he was trying to do was to earn some extra money to buy a bicycle. He said, I'm riding the bus to my construction job, but where the bus drops me off is this long distance still from the job site. He said, what I'd like to be able to do is to get a bike, and it could shorten that distance significantly or make it a lot faster for me to actually get to my job. Well, I thought, here's somebody that's really trying to do the right thing. He's trying his level best. This is a way that we can help somebody. And so long story short, I took him down to Walmart, and so we were looking at bikes, and we found one that was economical, that would suit his needs. And at our church in Charlotte, just as we have at Gate City, we had a benevolence line that this could be expensed out of. And so I used my church credit card, and I got him this bike, and he was just thrilled with this. This was really going to help him. And so we purchased this bike. He goes on his way, I go on my way. Well, then about 30 minutes, though, we got a call from Walmart. We had a church member who worked there, and they knew the connection with her and with the church. And so they called, and they said, we have a guy that has shown up with this brand new bicycle that was purchased on your church credit card, and he's wanting cash for it. What should we do? I said, do you have a gun? And I said, do not give him any money. I'm headed down there. And so I get in the car, and as quick as I can, I try to make my way down to Walmart. This guy's already long gone, and I'm riding around the community to see if I can find this guy, because I am absolutely ticked. I'm ticked because I have been hoodooed, and he has lied to me, and he was trying to take advantage of our graciousness, and it just infuriated me. But beyond that, I was furious because this guy has not only taken this money, this is ultimately God's money. He has taken from the church. He has lied and has deceived us and has taken from the church for his personal gain and personal benefit. And not only is that bad enough, but because he has done this, we have that much less now to be able to help somebody else. And so his stealing, his act of taking that which did not rightfully belong to him, this whole hoax and this charade, what it did, though, was to diminish our ability to help others. That's what Paul is saying. Listen, every one of us has needs, and the plan that God has primarily to meet those needs is that you do a hard day's work. You work for your employer, and whatever time you're to be working, you work. And through that, you not only maintain your character and integrity and demonstrate yourself as someone that's trustworthy, but you earn a wage that will be able to provide for you and for your family. Beyond that, recognize you're not just an island unto yourself, but there are people around you, especially within the family of faith, that you can help. And to the extent possible, be a part of that solution. Be part of meeting those needs. But when there's someone who is stealing, when there's someone who's taking in any form or fashion, what that does both individually and collectively is diminish our ability to help. And so what does God say about all of this? We said it as far back as the giving of the Ten Commandments. You shall not steal. Paul says here in Ephesians chapter 4, let him who stole steal no longer. Why? Because it diminishes the value of work, it challenges the principle of personal property, and it squelches our ability to help others. Let him who stole steal no longer. Paul is calling, God is calling for some behaviors to quit. My question for you today is, in your life and in your circumstance, what is it that needs to stop? I want you to bow your heads with me.